Good morning and welcome to our presentation today. Thank you for coming on behalf of the AFP board and the education committee. We have a very exciting program for you today. I'm Catherine Mannion from the education committee. My professional work is with data solutions. So this presentation today is right up my alley. I hope you enjoy it. Today we like to start though with introducing one of our newest members, Dr. Myra Henry. She's here to join us today, and we're just going to have a little conversation about AFP and our chapter. Let me tell you, well, actually, let me let you do it. Why don't can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone online. I am Dr. Myra Henry, President and CEO of YWCA Rochester and Monroe County. I've been in that role about 18 months now. I am a native Rochesterian, and I come into the nonprofit space by way of higher education. So as it relates to fundraising, now as a president and CEO, I am chief bottle washer and everything in between. But fundraising is a huge part of my job, actually closing the deal. I have a development team that does the prospecting and the like. And then as I always say to them, you call me in when you need me, tell me where you need me to be and what I need to say. So I work hard to support them in doing their work in fundraising for our organization. In my prior role, I was the administrator. I had a grant person who would go out and get the grants. My boss was the closer in that aspect. And what I've always told my grant officer was that you make the money, I'll spend it. So now I'm going out asking for it, and I have another team that spends it. So this has kind of been full circle for me. I, again, native Rochesterian. I earned my doctorate degree at St. John Fisher. My research area and focus was diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership, and what that means in practice with limited resources. What does that really mean, and how do we use our influence to impact change? And then my practical work is organizational management and just assessing organizations and making systems and things run well. So that's a bit about me. Oh, and I'm married with 4 kids, that too.
Where do you find the time?
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow. So you've been around fundraising for a while. Were you a member before, and are you coming back, or is this your first time joining our chapter?
So this is my first time joining the AFP, and I'm excited about that. I've been to a few programs. I've gone to one of the larger conferences, and the wealth of knowledge and information has just been invaluable. I actually took the course Fundamentals of Fundraising, and I did it more for the language. Because coming from higher education, the fundraising language, although the principles and the tenets are the same, the language is different. So I needed to know what was the nonprofit language around fundraising, and that course was very helpful with that.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad you're using the resources through us and online, I assume, as well. Yeah, great. Absolutely. Great. So what is it about the chapter that you would tell to someone else who is considering joining the chapter?
Yeah, the resources for sure. Yeah, the online resources, in-person opportunities like this, and the networking. I think that has been probably the most valuable, is to be in spaces with other development officers and other CEOs to see what should I be doing? What am I not doing to support my development team? And what do we need to be doing differently? What is the cutting edge? What are other folks doing that we can do also to raise funds for our organization?
That's great. And collaborating and learning from each other is so valuable. Great. Well, Dr. Henry, thank you so much for being with us. Awesome. And we are going to move on to our program now, I think. It's so wonderful to meet you and
thanks
have you
for
here.
having the conversation with
great.
me. Have a great day, everyone.
So moving on to our program, we have Tricia Marsherall, who is the founder and president of Marsherall Partners, LLC. And they're a consulting firm specializing in nonprofit donor database management and operations support and more, and virtual and traditional fundraising event management as well. Her firm has worked with more than 100 nonprofits across more than 20 states and 3 countries. Today, she will share with us the lessons she's learned on the way on donor analytics. So Tricia, please join us. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for hosting me. And thank you to the Education Committee for having me as well. Hopefully everybody online can hear me. So today I am really excited, and hopefully this All right. So we are going to kick it off with some background and introductions. This will be interactive. I will be asking the audience to participate. I know it's early in the morning, but I know you can do it. We will be going down through the types of data analytics, the barriers to them. Chris, I know we were talking about a few of those just a little while ago. And I'm going to talk through my must-dos for promoting data health, which will ultimately support your data analytics. We will also do a data challenge speed round. So I'm going to give you plenty of time, but think about a challenge that you're experiencing or have experienced in the past in your database. And we're going to, you will have the opportunity to ask a question. I will do my very best to answer it and potentially leverage some of the brain power in the room as well to share experiences. So we are really going to be letting our data nerd flags fly. We are going to raise them loud and proud. I thought of it Monday night while I was reviewing and pulling together my PowerPoint for today. And I wish I would have thought of it sooner because I would have figured out a way to purchase you some data nerd flags. But we will make do with our nerd flag on the slide instead. So before I jump in, I'll just share a little bit about my background. I started in the nonprofit sector working at Pluto Cancer Center Foundation. And there I did events, annual giving, fundraising. I had a few committees at the board. I started there right out of college. From there, I moved to Jewish Senior Life Foundation, and I absolutely loved my work there. I supported a $52 million capital campaign that was fundraising for a $108 million campus renovation expansion project. And I handled the day-to-day operations and supported the fundraisers who were going out to ask for that money, managed an complete overhaul of their database at the time as well. So from there, I realized that there is, and I have a MBA, my background is in business as well. So from there, I really realized that there was this gap between bringing business best practices to the nonprofit sector. And so my company was born, and I started it in 2016. I have been full-time for about 4.5 years now. I have a small team, small but mighty. We have 6 full-time and 1 part-time. So we, as Catherine said, get the privilege of working with nonprofits across the country. We have organizations spanning from 100% volunteer run to health systems spanning multiple states with a dozen affiliates. So everything in between, and it's really a privilege to be able to get up every day doing the work that I love and totally immersed in data all day, every day. So you will see me light up talking about it. And Kim, I see you laughing at me because you know all too well, firsthand experience. Okay, so enough about me. I want to hear a little bit about your background. So just quickly, if you don't mind, and if you are online, if you can just drop in the chat, and then Aisha, if you don't mind telling us who is joining virtually as well. But just tell me your name, your role, your organization, the size of your advancement team, and if you can think of one off the cuff, one of your biggest data challenges. So who would like to kick us off? I will not put anybody on the spot, but you will all have to go. Go ahead, Catherine.
I'll go first. I already told a little bit. Catherine Mannion from WIS Data Solutions. Tricia and I are sort of in the same business. Our team is based in Louisville, Kentucky, but also all around. There's 4 of us at our company. Again, like you, small but mighty, and work with organizations who have challenges with their data and their systems all across the country as well. And what was the question? Oh, biggest data challenge.
Yeah.
In my role, every organization I work with has the biggest data challenge. So I'm in that quicksand all day long with our organizations, just trying to help them understand how data is the foundation of any fundraising team. And it's important, we need to focus on it.
Looks like I'm next.
Yeah.
I'm Kim Smith. I'm the development manager at Villa of Hope. I've been there about 5 months, and we actually have the pleasure of working with Tricia and her team. They are fantastic. I will say that in my experience, both at the Villa and in previous roles, the biggest challenge is just the health of the data and the consistency in the data it seems like more and more, there's such a higher turnover in staff that there's inconsistencies on, you know, what was tracked, what wasn't tracked, and just how the data was entered. And just coming in, looking at it with fresh eyes is sometimes like, what were they thinking?
Hi, my name is Tracy Schleier, Senior Consultant at Benazat Advisors, and I have more than 3 decades experience in fundraising, starting at Alfred University, then many years at Boston University. Then I moved to Rochester and went to work for the Seneca Park Zoo, and then many years at the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, and more recently, Jewish Senior Life Foundation. But as I said, now I'm into consulting, and of all my experiences, what I have always known is that data is ultra important. Having good data makes a strong fundraising. So, oh yeah, and the question of size, Benazat Advisors were a team of 5 people.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Kristen Sanagurski. I'm the Associate Director of Development at the MCC Foundation. I've been there about 10 years, got about a dozen people on our advancement staff. And I'd say our biggest challenge with data is like harnessing the power of like everything our database can do. We have Razor's Edge, and you know, we have a couple people who are really responsible for making that like really sing for us, you know, on the back end. But you know, I think sometimes it's a time challenge for us as individual fundraisers to be doing everything that we could be doing in Razor's Edge. You know, especially for me personally, it's like all the moves management stuff and, you know, making sure that that's all being tracked in there. So.
I love it. You're hitting on, each of you is hitting on so much that we're going to chat through today. Chris.
Hi, Chris Smith. I work at SUNY Geneseo as a frontline major gifts fundraiser. I manage a team of 4 other fundraisers as well. The biggest challenge really is building a culture around making data-informed decisions. There is no culture currently that exists around data. So helping people understand the importance and the utility of it, not just for today, but how the things that we do today will affect the organization 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now in a way that we wish those decisions had been made 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Love it. Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Humbert. I'm at RIT, specifically a frontline gifts officer for the Saunders College of Business. I would say our team's approximately about 100 folks. And similar to what Kristen shared is we have good data, we have a good database, but for me, how do we push that data out for me to make well-informed decisions, who I should be spending my time with, who the timeliness of thanking someone who made a recent gift, you know, where are those opportunities that may have been missed because the data is not being pushed out.
Thank you. Anybody online?
Yes, so we have Danielle Pierleoni, Advancement Officer at Heritage Christian Services. They have 7 full-time and 2 part-time staff on their advancement team. They also work with Marsherall Partners. Their staff time is limited, but they have so much data cleanup to do and procedures to create. Marsherall Partners is helping them through that. It just takes time. Data was previously not geared toward what the gift officers would want to see and know about their donors and prospects. We also have Rebecca Fuss from the Library Foundation. They have a staff of 6, and it's a challenge to constantly keep updating the data, to keep the data up to date. We also have Jen Rogu, I could be pronouncing that incorrectly, Operations Manager with Episcopal Senior Life Communities with a staff of 4. They also said they're very similar. They're in a very similar situation. They have a lot of cleanup to do right now with their data.
I think they use Razor's Edge. I think Sarah Lee on my team may have worked with them once upon a time.
And then we have Gene Renner from Dimitri House. He manages their databases. They have a very small staff. Greatest challenge is encouraging staff to fully utilize databases for donor management and fundraising.
Thank you. And thanks for jumping in the chat there. So why data analytics? I mean, you've each really touched on it. We want to make sure that we can make data informed decisions and look at trends over time to help inform what the future might hold. And Nonprofit Hub did a recent study, and nonprofits responded that while 90% of them collect it, we're often pretty good about collecting it, especially at events now with different event solutions and technology. And sometimes that information doesn't make it into the system, or there's not great ways to make sure at educational institutions that once somebody graduates and leaves, how do we stay in touch with them and make sure that through time we're updating and receiving their updated information. So while we're really good at collecting it at points, we're not so good at actually harnessing the information. Only about 5% say that they use that information to make data informed decisions. So obviously we've talked about some of the benefits of this. So the fundraising, certainly data is the foundation of all fundraising decisions, and outreach as well. So really being able to understand who to reach out to, when we should be reaching them, what the ask amount should be. I worked with a few years back an organization who they were hoping to implement a recurring gift program for their donors. And they decided that they would make the standard ask of asking all donors for $50 a month. And most of the donors that were included in this mailing had only given about $50 to $250 in a year. And so that was a significant jump up, and the program really failed at launch. And when I was hired to come in and assist with them, that's one of the first things that we really dove into to see what happened. And it was the data that really illustrated the points that we need to make sure that we understand who's giving to us, how they're giving, how much they're giving, and then what the appropriate ask is based on that to really inform the rollout of a program like that. Of course, improving ROI and efficiency. So if you can identify who to reach out to, you can then reduce costs from mailing lists. You can also ROI looking at staff time. Many of you shared that you come from small shops, and virtually as well, many come from small shops, and your time is really precious. So understanding where to spend that to really get the best return on your investment of your time and your resources and talent at your organizations. And then trust and accountability. Donors are becoming more and more savvy about where they're choosing to invest in organizations. And I use invest intentionally because it is an investment. They are taking their hard-earned dollars, they are giving it to organizations to really be a force for good in our community and beyond, and make that impact. And so it's critically important that we are leveraging our data, we're sharing it with our donors so that we can communicate and combine our data with our anecdotal stories. I think nonprofits are really good about identifying those stories to share, but when we can leverage our data to couple that with the anecdotal stories, it really becomes a powerful tool and builds that trust and accountability with our donors. So we are going to chat through the different types of data analytics. So I have on the screen today the 4 types. This is identified and developed by people much smarter than me. Harvard Business Review shared this information, but descriptive data analytics answers the question of what happened. So looking back over time to see what did we send out, how did people respond to it. Diagnostic answers, why did this happen? So oftentimes organizations may have, when done right, they may send traditional in-person, or they may have traditional in-person events. They may send out mailers for appeals. They may send out multiple e-communications to support it, potentially some outreach from gift officers for those face-to-face visits. And so if there is a trickle campaign happening with multiple different avenues of how we're reaching out to our donors, those diagnostic analytics can tell us which channel probably secured the gift. And of course, we know that it's usually a combination of a few, but it helps to illustrate why something may have happened. Also looking back historically, we were just working with an organization recently, and we saw a huge uptick in donations about 5 years ago. Well, we realized that at that point in time, their long-term CEO of 30 years had retired. And so there was quite a bit of fundraising around that retirement. And so it really starts to illustrate data points and then sharing the history of the organization, we're able to figure out what's going on. We have predictive, and this is one of my favorites. Many organizations that we work with are in budget season right now. So that predictive analytics, I've worked with many organizations, and I'm sure you probably all have similar experiences where we look at last year's budget and then figure out, all right, a 5% increase or 10% increase, and we kind of just plug in numbers there. I really push organizations to take a look at how did our appeals perform? Where were we with our donor pipeline? So Kristen, really good point of sharing. We need to be able to take a look at what cycle are our donors in, and it should be tracked in the database and be able to say what probability will likely be soliciting, and of those that will be soliciting, what's the probability of those gifts that are going to come in. And then we can really start to pull together some data informed numbers for our budgeting. And then the last is prescriptive. So what should we do next? So using the data that we have and understanding based on this, really what should our strategy be? And this often comes into play when we're looking at capital campaigns. I know RIT has been in a huge one. So looking at those capital campaigns to say, who should we be reaching out to? What's our strategy here? And really, what should our number be that we are setting as our goal to fundraise? Back that out of capital campaigns and just on the day-to-day, what are our annual goals and how are we going to achieve them? So we've talked and you've shared a little bit, but just throw some of your top barriers for data analytics my way. What are some of the challenges? Time is really the biggest one. I think from a staffing standpoint to be able to invest and really digging into it. Yeah, excellent point.
Experience.
Absolutely.
I'd say understanding the value.
Yes. All good call outs there. So thank you. So time was my number one barrier here. So actually we were talking earlier in the nonprofit sector, there can be quite a bit of turnover, and especially when you have turnover in the position of those who are keying in that data, it can be done differently. But we were also talking about sometimes having long time tenured folks in those positions is just as challenging on the other side of that. I've worked with organizations where it's been the same person in the role for 15 years managing the data. And when you get very comfortable with how the data is being tracked, and sometimes our work is cyclical, and so you start to rely on the data and how it's coded and what you know, and that can also be a barrier. Data entry, of course, making sure that we're keying in all of the information correctly and consistently, and that we have processes and procedures to support that. Misuse of data codes and database infrastructure. This is really the biggest one, and quite frankly, the hardest one to untangle the knot, because when data is not tracked in the appropriate place in the database, then it's going to be a barrier every single time that you're trying to pull that information out or populate dashboards. I know, Kristen, you had mentioned that you use Razor's Edge and NXT and their insights tool. We're only as good as the information that's put in. And so it really starts with that entry. And when you're not populating it in the proper fields, then your dashboards for those analytics will not be able to populate correctly. Poor setup of the database infrastructure. Shadow databases are my nemesis. So there is information that is in the system, and then there is information that lives outside of the system, whether that is in spreadsheets or Word documents or Outlook calendars or in the heads of our fundraisers, because you are all so busy and you need to be out there raising money for your causes. But those shadow databases really pose a challenge, because it's never, when information is stored there, it's almost never actually translated then fully to the database, and therefore we will never have the full picture of what's happening at the organizations. Post-event follow-up and cleanup. Kim and I were just talking about the amount of work post-event. So the Villa of Hope just had their golf tournament yesterday, and making sure that that data, the updated golfer names and contact information that we received, gets into the database post-event. Same thing with mailings. When we get those NCOA reports back, it often falls to the bottom of our to-do list to get that information updated into the system. Gift entry and consistencies we've talked about. Lack of the financial reconciliations with our finance team. So for most organizations, larger organizations, hopefully that's not too much of a problem, but we often find that organizations that we work with, our general ledger codes don't necessarily match up to those of the finance team. And so finance has one set of numbers and advancement has another. And when that's reported out to the board, it can often cause some confusion. And that's when we have some problems that arise and need to make sure that we're digging in. So those financial reconciliations really help support data analytics, because otherwise it can't be trusted and it undermines the credibility oftentimes of the advancement team, because finance is the one that gets audited and we end up ultimately going with finance's numbers. So making sure that we align. No identified KPIs. So a lot of times organizations that we work with are overwhelmed by the thought of all of the data that they have and what's the best metric to report out and use as a goal. And so for me, it's really start somewhere, identify 3 metrics that you'd like to be able to track as an organization, and then set up some recurring meetings or recurring dashboards so that we can stay on top. When you are actually looking at it regularly, when you're talking about it with the team and talking about the strategy to achieve those goals, you are much more likely to achieve them. So we will move on. So some of our top budget-friendly must-dos, and I will not talk about the don'ts. I think we have a good sense of things that are barriers. I really want to focus on what we should be doing. So appeals. We're going to start and move through some of our common fundraising mechanisms and things that we can do that shouldn't take too much time or cost us too much, and hopefully will impact the bottom line in a positive way. So with appeals, I always tell our clients, make sure those constituent IDs are pulled on every file. A lot of times when those files get shared within organizations, people like to delete columns or accidentally hide columns, but those constituent IDs can help us import that information back in and develop our analytics based on how did that appeal perform, what's the ROI on it, especially from segmenting it. So segmenting lists is a really excellent way to be able to tell what's going on with your donor base and the success of your mailing. So we've worked with organizations who do A/B testing on the marketing side to see what's performing, what messaging is doing well, and tracking those segments. Usually we put a little code at the bottom of the envelope. We make sure that we know what they've received and how they're responding to it. Also, you can get creative year ends doing live mailings. So looking at who is at risk of lapsing and targeting them with a very specific ask or specific follow-up. And maybe it's phone calls, maybe it's handwritten notes, but making sure that we're identifying who those people are and segmenting, and then making sure that the data is reflecting how many folks within each segment have received that appeal. Over time, when you can start tracking that and staying consistent, we can then start to compare apples to apples and see data trends over the last 2 and 3 years and see, are we increasing our donors? Are they giving more? Are they decreasing? Have they lapsed? What's happening with them, and why are they or are they not responding to our appeals? Looking at duplicate records. So especially in appeals, this costs a significant amount of money, especially at educational institutions. If you have the parents who are in the database and then your graduates leave, and then sometimes graduates get married. So now you've got multiple mailings going to the same household, making sure that you understand how you're pulling that information and that you're managing duplicates within the database. Has anybody here used or leveraged Merge-O-Matic? No, and yes, we did. It's like, yes, I got one right. Yes, we did. So Merge-O-Matic is a tool. It's if you use Blackbot products, it syncs with Razor's Edge, and they offer a 30-day free trial that we always take advantage of with our clients. We do a quick scan of their database to see what's the data health. For those who are using Razor's Edge, the NXT merge tool I love Blackbaud products. The merge tool is not the best tool out there for merging records. It causes its own challenges in the database. When you merge records, it doesn't actually delete the merged record, it just inactivates it. So making sure that you're looking at those duplicates and merged records. Use of packages and sub-solicitation codes. So I don't think we have anybody here that uses Donor Perfect, so I will refrain from using sub-solicitation in the verbiage as I'm talking, but packages tend to be really useful and often an area where we see those misused in databases. So making sure that coding structure of campaign, fund, appeal, and package are used appropriately. And then consistent setup year over year. Sometimes we see organizations decide to randomly switch up their campaign or their appeal or package use. And then of course that post-event cleanup. We've talked a little bit about events. Many organizations that we work with are not leveraging event software solutions. We see some organizations trying to use the events module in Razor's Edge. It's okay for some things. Most of the time, I recommend using a tool like Greater Giving. Go ahead, Aisha.
So we have a question online.
Love
Can
it.
you elaborate more on when a package should be used?
So a great question. A package can be used in a couple of different scenarios. So if we're sending out an appeal, a package would be a segment. So if you have your LIBUNs, if you have, I'm going to go with education, secondary education, because I think it'll make the most sense. So if you have grandparents, you might send a specific letter to grandparents of your students, parents of your students. We may send one out for folks who have a particular interest in a program or service at the organization. So within appeals, it should be the segment. And within events, it should be your sponsorships, your ticket sales, your silent auction purchases, live auction. So it should be the different ways in which money was raised through the solicitation that you're making. Hopefully that answered the question, and also the segue into our events. So a lot of organizations I have some organizations still using paper for managing a lot of their events, but these event software solutions are semi-affordable, depending on your budget, but they usually run about $1,000 to $1,500 a year, and generally you can cancel at any point in time. So for not too much money, you can really make a huge return on your investment. You can get those cards swiped ahead of time so that you're not chasing down money after the fact. So huge ROI there in my book, not just on your staff time, but also making sure that you're actually getting those funds that were committed to you. All right, this is one of my favorite ones when I start to work with organizations, because you know what, I'm actually going to ask the question here. So if somebody can share, what's the typical process when you request a list or data information, some sort of data report at your organization? What's the standard process that you work through? Go ahead, Kristen.
I email Lisa and ask her and tell her what I want. Like,
Okay.
there's no form. That's it. It's an email.
So it's an email, great. And usually what's that? Give me an example of what the email will say. What do you ask for?
So I'll say, could you please pull me a list of donors who have given $1,000 or more in the last fiscal year, include name, all contact information, fiscal year giving, lifetime giving,
Okay,
as an example.
and then it magically appears in your inbox.
Yes.
A couple days later. Is that a similar experience? I'm seeing heads nod and probably some heads nodding on Zoom as well. So yes, that is often the process that we work down through, and that I think often tends to be a missed opportunity for organizations. When you are requesting data, it's such a wonderful opportunity to ask and to learn about what's happening and leverage the brain power of the folks who are pulling your data. They are so intimately aware of your donors. They probably see these names routinely. And so often we see some of the common mistakes that happen is you say, I want to see all cash of our donors who have given last year. And that's when we start digging into gift types. So do you mean, is cash also meaning pledge payments on the back end, recurring gifts? are coded with a different gift type than just a standard cash donation. And so if you say all cash and your database person is making sure that they are bringing and giving you exactly what you're looking for, sometimes there's, I call it, it's lost in translation. And so in my role, I often tend to be that translator to say, okay, tell me a little bit more. Are you wanting to see pledge payments? Are there any other populations that should be included that may be missed in this data set? So what happens if you have a board member who gives whose card is charged throughout the year, and so they haven't hit that threshold of the cumulative giving that you're looking for at the point in time that you make that request, then it's possible that they could be left off of a mailing. And that's how we get calls from upset donors. And it always happens with the one person that you don't want it to happen with, right? So making sure that we're having that internal conversation, but beyond the conversation, it's really helpful to put some sort of quick form in place, and we can do Google Forms, and I'm sure your database administrators would gladly put something together for you because it helps them to know, what's your time frame? What are you doing with this information? So that's one question that often doesn't get asked, and it's helpful for those folks who are pulling the data to know the type of data informed decisions that you are hoping to make with this list. Are you looking for donors within a certain mile radius because you're getting ready for a trip and you need to know who's in the area? Are you hoping to look at this for budgeting purposes? Is it for because you're looking at doing some sort of event and you want to invite donors? So really understanding what you're doing with that information so that they can perhaps share what they may choose to include in that. And when you do that, then there's less back and forth if something is pulled incorrectly. And so again, looking to be efficient and make sure that you're getting the right list the first time. Does that make sense? Does that, yeah, go ahead.
So I have comments online. I don't know if you want me to share.
Yeah,
No
please.
questions. Comments. Rebecca Fuss says she tells her database manager what she wants to know, and the database manager pulls the report she knows she needs.
Okay.
Danielle,
She's got a great person on team then when you can trust the person in that position, absolutely.
give a thumbs up. Danielle Piglioni says when she was a database manager, she asked important questions to make sure they were looking. When I was a database manager, I asked important questions to make sure we were looking at all of the data points the requester wants to see, and I would offer recommendations and things to consider or include.
Danielle, I love it, and I am not at all surprised. Awesome, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. The other piece, and you really hit on it, Kristen, when you mentioned, sometimes we say, I want to see all donors last year. Are you talking last fiscal year? And Karen, that's a big one for RIT, I'm sure. Or are you looking at calendar year to see, because for donors, they want to, calendar year is really pressing for them. The fiscal year, they don't much care about. And so how are we defining the time period of last year? And are we looking at cumulative giving or are we looking at one-time gifts? Those are two very different lists that we're pulling. Okay, so I had mentioned it's important to identify what those top KPIs are. So what are some of the metrics that you at your organizations are tracking, whether it's for your gift officers or for overall, how your appeals perform, your donor retention or donor analysis? What are some of those KPIs that you track within your organizations? Gifts and commitments. Okay, so expand on that a little bit. So
every morning we get a report and it shows where we were last year, where our target is based on, our goal for the overall year.
okay,
So it helps track, are we ahead or behind
Okay.
where we were a year ago?
okay. So compared to budgets, compared from last year at this point and actual of where you are this year to that point, and looking at overall fiscally where you need to be at. Okay. That's the most common one, looking at how the revenue of what's come in. And I like that you're looking at it daily. That's you're really crunch time for a goal, that tells me. Any others?
Major gift asks,
Okay,
and major gift closes.
Are you looking at that monthly, quarterly? Daily. All right.
Have donor retention and acquisition rates.
Donor retention and acquisition rates. And are you looking at that? How often are you looking at those numbers? As they type in the chat.
Monthly.
Monthly, okay? Yeah, so often, as I mentioned, the top thing that people are tracking is just looking at, okay, how are we doing financially? And if we're ahead, we celebrate. If we're behind, we panic. And if we're on track, then we're doing okay and we're gonna keep moving. I think one of the best things to do from a data analytics standpoint is really pick what are those 3 things that are going to be most impactful. So if we're looking to stay on track with budget, what do we need to do? And I think the major gift solicitations is certainly a key piece of that. Kristen, you had shared the moves management piece is one that is important to you to be tracking. And I agree with that from the major gift officer standpoint, understanding what are those visits that we're making, tracking those action items. And that often tends to be a pain point for organizations because they've been either put in inconsistently, sometimes we put them in notes, and the definition of what constitutes a meaningful interaction or meaningful visit, and then tracking that information, making sure it gets into the database. So what are the visits that are going to lead to those major gift solicitations? What's the effort that we're putting in to get the desired output? And so identifying what some of those KPIs might be, but also tracking it so that you're looking at this regularly. So hearing online that you're looking at some of those pieces monthly is important because you need that real-time information. If you're receiving reports quarterly of what happened, and generally it takes a little while to put that together, you're really working from outdated information. And being able to have some tools at your fingertips that will hopefully automate some of the process, the data analytic process for you. Looking at your appeals. So each time you're doing an appeal, oftentimes organizations, especially those that are down a lot of staff positions. I've been working with many clients, and Catherine, I know you had shared you have some clients as well, who are down to full-time people, and a shop of 5 is a lot. And it's sometimes difficult. You're doing your best to just keep afloat and keep your head above water. But making sure that you're identifying what's our goal here and then looking at how did this perform? Because oftentimes organizations just send out the mailing because it's what they've done before. And mailings can get very expensive. And so what are some of our creative ways where we can make sure that we're paying attention to it? We are identifying target segments, and then we're reporting out on how it did. A couple of my other favorite ones, I know they shared online, new donor acquisition, donor retention. It's much more costly to try and gain new donors than it is to retain your existing donors. So making sure that you're building those relationships. And what's your pipeline for donor stewardship? So if somebody has recently made a gift, how are you made aware of that information so that you can identify whether that you should be sending a handwritten note or pick up the phone and call? And then how can we leverage our volunteers to also make a call? I like to do thankathons. Sometimes around the Thanksgiving holiday, just to call up our donors and not ask for any money, just to say thank you for being loyal supporters to us. As you're looking at these KPIs, what are some of the questions or barriers that you can think of that would prevent you from being able to implement one of these or any of these?
I think one of the biggest hurdles we have, and I think you know this, is because of the way the data was kept, we're not always comparing apples to apples. So it's like, this is the best information I can get from where we are at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point, Kim.
So hypothetically, if we were working with a leader who wanted all of this and more, 50-ish daily KPIs, that to me seems impossible to focus.
Yep.
Did you have a guideline, or I know you said start with 3,
Mhm.
but what would be for a sort of a mature organization? What would be the right sweet spot number?
So I'm going to ask a few questions before I answer the question. Typical consultant move, right? So what's your Are you in a campaign? What's your fundraising? Okay, so you're in a campaign right now, okay? And do you have specific goals and metrics around the campaign in addition to your annual fundraising requirements? Or is this comprehensive, everything's counting?
Everything's counting.
Everything's counting,
Yeah.
great, okay. So for me, if you are in a campaign, it's really about the existing donors that you have. Bringing in new donors for your campaign may work, but it's really gonna be on your existing donors. So the KPIs that I would really be focusing on are going to be around your prospect pipeline. So of course, any of the financials related to your campaign, but I would be focused on what's the life cycle that each of your donors are in, as well as the opportunities that you're working to solicit them for. So we typically code the donors, your donors in the pipeline using a couple of key codes to understand, are they in cultivation, solicitation, stewardship, and are they major gift prospects? Are they more public phase of the campaign where we're going to really reach out to those donors at that point in time? And then we're looking at the opportunities. So if you have a donor who is a major gift prospect and who you know is you're named in their will, then what's the opportunity that you're going to be asking of them, and what's the stage of that? So making sure that we are clearly defining and know what stage those opportunities in. So is it you're getting ready to solicit, you have a verbal commitment, or is it really just you're in the identification phase and you're exploring what those opportunities may be with the donor? An opportunity / proposal is the ask that you are planning on making, and it's the strategy within the record. And it should be a documented strategy within the record. So for me, those are the most telling metrics of how the fundraisers are performing toward goal. So looking at your pipeline, your stages, your proposals, and the actions to get there. That all, if you're doing those things correctly, the numbers will follow. And so for a lot of organizations that we work with are focused very heavily on where are we tracking towards goal, but it's those inputs that is going to drive the outcome there. And so for me, it's about tracking what are those inputs. So to track all of that and more, you're spending so much more time trying to get those reports and get that data in than actually out the door fundraising. So sometimes too much of those data analytics is actually going to negatively impact your bottom line. So making sure that you're identifying what those most important ones are and focusing on that and doing it well. You can then build on that for next year once you get used to tracking those pieces, but pick a handful and do it well. Great question. Okay, so a couple of budget-friendly ways for data analytics is really leveraging the technology that you have in place. So if you have NXT, take a little bit of time and invest in setting up those dashboards right. And I'm gonna flip to the very end. NXT Insight Designer is a really powerful tool. It unlocks some capabilities within your database. It's not perfect, but it unlocks some really good information, and it's fairly inexpensive to use. Most organizations that we've worked with have been able to secure it for about $1,200 annually. So for Blackbaud anyway, that's a fairly affordable tool. And if you can build it into your budget, I think it's a really good investment to make. Only build it into your budget though, if you have somebody that is either that you can work with, train on your team, or can be trained on your team to get it set up, or work with a consultant to get a few dashboards set up for you. The NXT dashboards and other tools is auto-populating the information. So if you identify a couple of those KPIs, you can look at it daily. The other piece that I really like about NXT is they have a fundraising work center. So making sure and investing in each of your gift officers, go down through with them to make sure they have the appropriate views. Oftentimes we find that, and this is really for any database, that folks that are in your database are looking at their screens differently. So you might be asking about something and the other person on the other end can't even see it on their screen because they don't have the proper views or even user access that they need for that information. So starting there to make sure that your team has all the information that they need. Standardizing your reports. So pick those KPIs, set up your report so that you're not reinventing the wheel each time you're trying to find it. but also help the folks that are requesting these reports sometimes understand, and for those who are the requesters, ask the question, how difficult is it to pull this information? How long might it take to pull this? Because if the answer is, the report magically appears in your inbox, but it took somebody 10 hours and they were stressing about this to pull, is that worth it? Or was this just something that you really wanted to see because you were curious? So understand where your staff is investing their time and how we can make sure that we're leveraging their skill sets as well. And then Excel. So I said I hate shadow databases, but sometimes the tools that we have from Razor's Edge or different CRM solutions that we're using really don't give us the capabilities that we need in order to get down to the information. So for smaller shops, I say leverage Excel, take some advanced classes, understand how to use pivot tables, understand how to use some of the formulas in Excel. For data analytics, and if you do have a bit more of a budget and your dashboards in your software solution just aren't cutting it, then you may consider some sort of BI tool, business intelligence tool. There are some that are out there that are fairly affordable, and you can then take these tools. We have some organizations that we work with who actually set up a data warehouse. They take it a step further, and so they're feeding information from the financial software solution, advancement, and a couple other sometimes the marketing tools as well. It all gets fed into one system so that the analytics can populate there as well. So depending on the size of your organization, it may make sense to invest in something like that as well. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes for our data challenge speed round. So we are going to get right into it. If you have a data challenge that you've thought of, you want to talk about how I may recommend where to start or what to do. Chris, you threw out a really good one. So thank you for kind of giving that as the example for us. But do we have anybody that has an example or a data challenge that you're experiencing that you'd like to chat about?
I'll throw one out that's really quick. We've obviously been working with you to help clean up our data and improve our data health because there was a need to do so. We have been making tremendous strides and is definitely improving. How do we get other members of the organization now to have faith in the data so that we're not always like, nope, this is right, this is right, this is right.
Yeah.
Like, so just increasing the internal confidence in the data.
So that's a challenge and a really thoughtful question, and that often is the challenge. So I do this a couple of different ways. Number one, it's being open and communicating all that we've done. So and quantifying it, right? So using the data to say, we had 15,000 action items and we have now cleaned up all of it. We've standardized the coding around it and we're really excited and take some time to share dashboards, perhaps that have been developed in order to populate that information. For the Villa in particular, we're working with your finance team to make sure that the general ledger codes match exactly what's in the database. And so sharing that we partnered with the finance team and they have full confidence in these numbers, and so do we. And so hopefully getting them to share that a little bit as well. And then if that open communication still doesn't work, it's a little bit frustrating initially, but for sometimes the first year with organizations that we work with, it's going back to say, okay, we've looked at the data, we've verified, we've checked these pieces, and here you go. And so it's going back, it's double checking and communicating that you've double checked it to rebuild that trust again. Aisha, was there a question online?
Yes. Do you still believe Blackbaud is the top choice donor database CRM for nonprofits? Do you recommend other options for smaller budget orgs?
Can I ask who that question is coming from?
Danielle.
Okay, so I do feel that Razor's Edge is still the right solution. And that's a very loaded question and it's a very loaded endorsement. So navigating and migrating to a different database is a pain all in itself, and it will take 3 to 5 years before it's actually migrated, that you trust the information that's in there, that the data is clean that's in there, and that your team learns it all over again. So while there have been some challenges with Blackbaud, I don't believe that that there's other solutions out there that aren't going to experience similar challenges along the way. So I think it's and Blackbaud is a very powerful tool. It really is a good tool for organizations that have much smaller budgets, much smaller record counts. Generally, they're not on Blackbaud yet. And for those organizations, I recommend Donor Perfect. I think it's a really good tool. Its infrastructure is similar to Blackbaud. It's not as nearly as robust or powerful as Blackbaud products, but it's a good tool.
Not to mention the cost associated with having to migrate to another tool if you're unhappy. And you will probably, if you were to migrate from another tool, every tool has its frustrations. Nothing can do everything you want it to do. You may find yourself abandoning something like Razor's Edge because you're frustrated with it and finding those same frustrations after 3 years and spending, possibly $100,000 to make that change.
I've seen that, and then I've seen organizations go back to Blackbaud after that. Okay, so the final piece then, share those results. As I stated at the very beginning, couple those data points, those KPIs with your anecdotal stories. That's when it's going to be most powerful. And so share those data points, pick a few, share them in your annual report. And while we're talking annual report, those can tend to be very extensive and labor intensive to produce. I always recommend to our clients, pick a handful of your donors that you want to print and mail it to. You don't necessarily need to mail it to everybody. Send out a postcard with a QR code to the digital version of your annual report, and it'll be much more budget friendly for you. I will wrap it up now. Thank you. Thank you for letting your data nerd flags fly with me today. I love starting out my day with each of you discussing data, and I appreciate your time. And I will pass it back over to Catherine.
Great. Thank you, Tricia, for such awesome information. I'm right there with you with the nerd flag, and it's awesome to have partners in this kind of data world that we live in. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It was
Thank
great
you.
information. Just a couple of quick things about upcoming events that we have. Our next event will be Tuesday, August 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. And that is a webinar. It's called Cryptocurrency 101, How to Incorporate Cryptocurrency into Your Fundraising Strategy. I'm sure we can all use that. Cryptocurrency means nothing to me, so I'm looking forward to that one. Our presenter on that is the Giving Block. And again, that's Tuesday, October 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. 2 days later, our next event is on Thursday, October 13th from 9 to 10 a.m. and it will be in this format. So you have the opportunity to be online or to be here in the room with us. We encourage you, if you're comfortable, to please join us because it's a great opportunity to network as well. That event is called Get 'em and Keep 'em, Recruiting and Retention Strategies for a New Era. Sounds like an awesome event. Presenters for that are Torrance, am I saying that right? Yep. Sparkman, an associate professor at RIT, and Craig Evans, an associate dean from Johns Hopkins. So I'm sure those two gentlemen will have some great insight into recruiting and retaining. Let me ask a question. Do they mean staff? Okay, recruiting and retaining staff. So we hope to see you there. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Tricia, for joining us and giving us all that great information. Have a great day, everyone.